Welcome to WorldView, the foreign policy show with Hindustan Times, and our guest for this week is the Australian High Commissioner. You are about to go back after a pretty long stint in India. How do you look back at the 4 years that you've been here, and what were the highlights? What are the biggest achievements?
Well, I actually think if I look back over the 4 years, the remarkable achievement is the pace at which our two countries have grown closer together. I think it's fair to say, in fact, I was talking to someone earlier today who said the same thing, that 4 years ago, I don't think that our countries at most levels had a very clear picture of each other. And it's dramatic how that's changed in the 4 years. We've seen a huge uptick in the strategic relationship. In fact, that's actually what's led the charge, right? So the defence engagement and strategic engagement we have has just grown tremendously. So last year we had our largest ever defence exercise, the AusIndex exercise. And of course in other dimensions our strategic dialogues have grown in both bilateral and minilateral on a range of issues. We talk about maritime security, we talk about counterterrorism, we talk about cyber. All those things have grown tremendously. Australia has been a huge supporter of the Raisina dialogue year after year, and we have a very strong presence there every year. The economic relationship has continued to grow. So in 2018, we saw trade, investment, education and tourism grow in double digits just in that year alone. So and I think all of that is sort of underpinned by the size of the Australian diaspora, the Indian diaspora in Australia. Those numbers have grown tremendously. I think they bring a lot of weight and a lot of sustainability to the relationship.
One of the highlights that we were looking forward to was the visit by the Australian Prime Minister, which unfortunately got deferred because of the bushfires. Yes. We believe it's still in the pipeline. And what do you think will be the biggest outcomes when he does get here?
Well, I think that, and thank you, for the thought about the bushfires as well. I mean, the Prime Minister is very keen to reschedule the visit, and I'm very optimistic that that will take place in coming months. What I think we can expect from a Prime Minister's visit, as always is the case, is it brings a focus to the relationship. And I think there are enough elements of the relationship that we can take them together and actually lift the relationship up a level. And that's really what I'm hopeful that we'll be able to deliver. It certainly seems the Indian government is of that mind as well, to build more ambition and to raise the profile.
There's been a lot of talk that there will be an agreement on defence, mutual support for logistics that's going to be signed.
We're very keen to conclude such an agreement, and of course talks have been underway, so hopefully we will see that also come to conclusion.
Also, you've come out with the India Economic Strategy recently, which is a very focused document looking at the picture till 2035, and you're looking at India to become the third largest export destination. How are you going to go about, achieving this target?
So the first and most important thing about the India Economic Strategy is it reframes the economic relationship. It gets us out of a conversation that is narrowly based on free trade agreements or on questions about ease of doing business. It actually says, here are 10 sectors where Australian businesses can do business with India. Here's where the opportunities lie. And think about India as a collection of states. Every state is different. So it explains India to Australian businesses. And what we have seen as a result of that is actually an increase in interest by Australian business. Now, it's not going to happen overnight, but I really do see a growth in interest by Australian business, also by Australian state governments who are sort of driving the business engagement. And I think that will be what will underpin the headline in the economic
Where do you see the most potential, out of the 10 sectors?
Well, out of the 10, the report identified 4 leading sectors. So education, which is of course a very important sector, not just in terms of Indian students going to Australia, but the kinds of collaborations that lead to commercial outcomes. There's tourism, there's resources, and there's agribusiness and agriculture. And all of those areas are where Australia has strengths, and we can bring real change in terms of investment, in terms of know-how, and in terms of genuine mutual partnerships with India for the benefit of both of our economies.
One of the issues is, the cooperation to make, to drive exports, but there are worries that the Indian economy has been slowing down a little bit. Where do you see things going in that form?
Economies go in cycles, and I think ours is no exception. The question is, I suppose, how governments respond to that cycle and the kind of confidence that can be built with business and other economic actors. So it will be interesting to see how the budget goes to addressing some of those. Everything I see is the government is taking the current downturn very seriously and actually applying effort and thought to how to address that. But for all that, I think the India economic strategy talked about a 20-year time frame. And in that 20 years, I think that even we can expect there to be cycles up and down, but our judgment remains that India is still a very good prospect, and that the trend line over 20 years is still in an upwards trajectory and still very positive.
There's also been a lot of talk about cooperating in the rare earth minerals in the mining area. Is that something we are seeing progress on?
I think there's a lot of interest by both countries. Australia's been looking much more closely at rare earth and what we call critical minerals development in Australia. We are a country that has most of the rare earth minerals are actually located in Australia. India is also looking for new sources. I think it's wonderful to see that even since the India economic strategy, we've been able to define and find new ways of cooperating, and I really hope that this will also come together.
You mentioned also, there's been this uptick in defense, and one of the things that we saw, which was watched with a lot of interest last year, was the upgrading of the Quad to the ministerial level. But at the same time, we saw the Russian foreign minister recently criticizing the Indo-Pacific strategy, and there's been some criticism of the way things are going. Where do you see, the Quad and the Indo-Pacific cooperation going?
Well, I think it's first important to understand that the Quad and the Indo-Pacific are two different things. Indo-Pacific is how Australia describes our strategic environment. We're a country that faces the Pacific Ocean on one side and the Indian Ocean on the other side. It makes absolute sense for us to say all around us is the Indo-Pacific. And so we are then trying to think about what is the kind of Indo-Pacific that we are trying to achieve? What is the kind of strategic environment we want to live in? That's what our Indo-Pacific strategy is all about. India is thinking about the Indo-Pacific, but in its own way. And so is every other country in the region. And where those elements of those ideas align, we sit down, we talk to them in small groups. Because it's always useful to share perspectives and to come to common understanding. That is just how diplomacy is done. We do that trilaterally, so we have a trilateral with Australia, India and Japan, for instance. But we also are prepared to do it quadrilaterally where we have other like-minded countries, which is how the Quad has come about.
Sure. How do you look at the criticism from some quarters that, the Indo-Pacific is trying to shut out China? That's what the Russian foreign minister said. Well,
I always find that kind of puzzling because in Australia's Indo-Pacific concept, China is very much a part of the Indo-Pacific. So our idea is really to find an Indo-Pacific which is stable and which actually supports the prosperity of all countries, that respects the sovereignty and independence of all the countries in the Indo-Pacific. That is what we are striving for, and we are prepared to work with all countries in the region to do that.
We've signed, India and Australia have an agreement on civil nuclear cooperation, and there's been talk about uranium supplies from Australia. Where do we stand now? There have been some reports that there are some differences on end-use monitoring of the uranium that is possibly going to be supplied by Australia.
So I think that implementing arrangements have been agreed, and I think that we're still, trying to talk and move forward on how we actually bring that to life now. So that's an ongoing process. I'm fairly confident we will see uranium sales to India in due course.
Would you have a time frame in mind for that?
Well, it's very difficult for me to predict, in large part because uranium in Australia is mined by private commercial companies, and there are commercial confidentiality issues also to consider. But I'm fairly confident we will see that happen.
Sure. In education, are you looking at any specific ways to attract more Indians to Australia? What are the places? You spoke about, academic cooperation and collaboration. Any kind of specific areas that you're looking at?
So it's with education. it is the case that there's virtually no field in our bilateral relationship where education doesn't have a part to play. Sure. Take, for instance, sport. We find that if we want to build sport collaboration, the best way to do it is through linking our educational and academic institutions in sports science and nutrition and health and even sports management, those kinds of areas, which actually then open doors to the sports collaboration. So there are many ways that we actually can build the education partnership in a way that actually supports the bigger relationship between us. That's not to say that Australia is still not a very attractive and very welcoming destination for Indian students, and the numbers continue to grow year after year. We now have over 100,000 Indian students in Australia. It's a very popular destination, and I think as word of mouth gets passed around about the quality of Australian education, we have quite a number of institutions in the top 100, and about the quality of life for a student, sure, then I think that is what is actually generating a lot of interest.
Also, I would, as a representative of a country that has benefited a lot from immigration, one of the issues that is currently being discussed a lot in India is the new citizenship law. In fact, it's supposed to be coming up even in the European Parliament in the form of a resolution. How do you look at the debate that is going on the citizenship law and the protests that have been happening?
So we're watching, I think we're just watching it closely and with a lot of interest, like a lot of people who are around. At one level, I think it is also possible to say that the protests are a sign of a healthy democracy at work. But of course, what we would very much like is for India to continue to be the champion for democracy that it has long been, including in the region. So we continue to watch and see how this is evolving.
One quick final question. What are the personal memories you're going to take back when you leave India? Your fondest memories?
Oh, I have so many memories. I would have to say, I always say that the most satisfying part of this job has been the people I have met. I have met so many interesting people and so many great people in the time I've been here. But I have to say that last year after Diwali, I travelled with my mother and father and my daughter to the village in Punjab where my father was born. And I think for me, that was a very special moment. And I think if I think back, that's the memory that stays most with me, is this sense that I do have family here and I do have a connection with India, which I think will continue even, after I leave.
Hi, Commissioner. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you.